This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. This week, Simon Phipps and I talk with Drummond Reed about frontiers of trust, especially around self-sovereign identity, a topic we've talked about before on the show, but we really summarize in a huge way and drill down deep thanks to some really good and tough questions from Simon and the back channel. This is a really great show. I think it's one of the most important shows that we've done because we're going to be using SSI in one way or another, hopefully on open source and with open source foundation underneath it, but possibly with some big running the whole damn show. So we were worried about that. We want to make sure we do it right, and trust is in our hands and not theirs. And if you want to learn about that, that is coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly episode 673, recorded Wednesday, March 23rd, 2022. Frontiers of Trust. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by New Relic. That next 9 p.m. call is just waiting to happen. Get New Relic before it does. And you can get access to the whole New Relic platform and 100 gigabytes of data free per month forever. No credit card required. Sign up at newrelic.com/floss. Hello again and good whenever it is, wherever you are in the world. I am Doc Searls, and this is FLOSS Weekly. This week with guest host Simon Phipps, aka WebMink, and there he is in his Southampton lair, as always. How you doing, Simon?
I'm doing pretty well here. I'm just looking out the window. There's actually sunshine and blue sky. It's almost as if spring is coming. I'm trying not to get too excited about that, but the mud is beginning to harden, and the garden has got shoots of life in it. So it's quite a good day.
So the crocuses and daffodils aren't there yet?
No, we have crocuses and daffodils. The cherry plum is flowering. The pear tree is just about to burst into flower. It's just that point of the year where it's beginning to look quite pretty out there.
Crocus and dandelions are always the fake spring before the real spring, when the second winter comes and covers them in snow and ice and gloom.
You're one of these people from a place with 12 seasons, I see.
Yeah, I know, right, exactly. But I'm between last week and this, I was in New York and Baltimore, and in the sky circling before we landed in Harrisburg because they couldn't get into New York and had to drive there in the middle of the night. And but I'm back here in Bloomington, Indiana, where we are in a river of rain that will continue as if this was Southampton for some time. Anyway, so our topic this morning, and we've touched on it in earlier shows, but haven't dug into it, I hope, in the depth we will today, is with Drummond Reed, now of Avast, formerly of Evernym, formerly from many other things. Are you up on what he's about and what you said earlier that you have thoughts? So
yeah, I Drummond's not someone that I've met before, so I'm looking forward to meeting him. I'm familiar with identity management because I was involved in an identity management company when I left Sun Microsystems. And so had to become familiar with various flavors. And I'm also familiar with blockchainy things. And self-sovereign identity is definitely a blockchainy thing. So I've got sufficient knowledge to be dangerous but not sufficient knowledge to be educational.
Oh, you always are anyway. So, okay, I want to jump into that. So, but first I have to let everybody know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by New Relic. If you're a software engineer, you've been there, it's 9 p.m., you're finally unwinding from work, your phone buzzes with an alert, something's broken, and your mind's already racing at what could be wrong. Is it the back end or the front end? Is it global? Is it the server? Is it the network? Is it the cloud provider? Do we have slow running queries? Did I introduce a bug in my last deploy? And now the whole team is scrambling from tool to tool and messaging person after person to find and fix the issue. According to a New Relic report, only half of all organizations are implementing observability for their networks and systems. The report showed how maintaining network observability continues to be an issue for companies around the world. That won't happen if you get New Relic. New Relic combines 16 different monitoring products that you normally buy separately, so engineering teams can see across their entire software stack in one place. You'll get application monitoring, that's APM, unified monitoring for your apps and microservices, Kubernetes and Pixie, instant Kubernetes observability with Pixie, distributed tracing, see all your traces without management headaches so you can find and fix issues fast, network performance monitoring, stop guessing where performance issues start, and ditch data silos for a system-wide correlated view, and so much more. More importantly, you can pinpoint issues down to the line of code so you know exactly why the problem happened and can resolve it quickly. That's why the dev and ops teams at DoorDash, GitHub, Epic Games, and more than 14,000 other companies use New Relic to debug and improve their software. Whether you run a cloud-native startup or a Fortune 500 company, it takes just 5 minutes to set up New Relic in your environment. That next 9 p.m. call is just waiting to happen. Get New Relic before it does, and you can get access to the whole New Relic platform and 100 gigabytes of data free per month forever. No credit card required. Sign up at newrelic.com/floss. That's NEWRELIC.com/floss. newrelic.com/floss. Okay, so back on the show here. Our guest this morning is Drummond Reed, who I have known ever since I met him when he won an award at an identity show decades ago. And internet identity has been problematic forever. It's why we have a show that I helped put on called Internet Identity Workshop twice a year. Got one coming up in April. And Drummond's been at all of those, I think, and he's just been a huge figure in that. And I'm looking at his very long bio here. I'm going to just jump through it. He's all about identity, internet identity, security, privacy, trust infrastructure. He's a director of trust services at Avast, that's AVAST, since their acquisition of Evernym, where he was the chief trust officer. He's the co-author of a book, Self-Sovereign Identity. It's coming out from Manning shortly. I write the foreword to that book. Co-editor of the W3C Decentralized Identifiers, that's the DID 1.0 spec. He's at the Trust Over IP Foundation. He's a member of the steering committee and the co-chair of the Governance Stack Working Group and the Concepts and Technology and Terminology Working Group. At the Sovereign Foundation, he served as co-chair of the Sovereign Governance Framework Working Group for 5 years. From 2005 to 2015, he was co-chair of the OASIS XDI Technical Committee. And by the way, XDI is a standard that happened there, along with another one called XRI, which we don't have to get into because it didn't exactly take off, but it still influenced a lot of things since then. But Drummond was the prime author of that thing. He was the executive director for two industry foundations. The Information Card Foundation came out of work by Kim Cameron and others at Microsoft, and Open Identity Exchange. It goes on and on. Okay, so and I'm going to stop there and bring Drummond in. We'll show his face shortly. But I want to say that this is important to me because all the work I've been doing for like 20 some years, I think rests on the success of self-sovereign identity happening. So Drummond, welcome to the show, man.
Oh, no pressure there, Don.
There he is. Speaking of pressure, by the way, Drummond came in from the future. We had him scheduled in April, and the person we had scheduled this week is going to be in April again. We kind of swapped him out. So, but he came off the bench and is not even in his usual office right now.
No, because my house is getting replumbed. So if we hear any loud bangs, at some point during the broadcast, even though I asked the plumbing team to be as quiet as they could.
Well, here, our loud neighbor's dog is 2 floors up. That's a new dog, new noise. But I'm still in the basement here. So tell me quickly, without going through the entire history here, but tell us about, okay, if you're going to sum up what SSI is, especially for our crowd, which is open source developers, primarily, and open source obsessives like me, because I'm not a developer, what it's about and what the promise of it is. And then we can get into some of the particulars.
So because it's you and I talking, Doc, I will actually start by saying it's all about actually empowering whoever an identity owner is. And of course, self-sovereign identity is, the very term suggests it's all about you, the individual. And it is all about you, the individual. But identity is pervasive in computing. And so self-sovereign identity infrastructure is really about anything that needs identity. People, of course, but also organizations, governments, but things. And it applies to IoT as much as it does to people, organizations. And from a, I always use the same prop, and Doc, you've seen me do this many times. Easiest way to summarize it, and for folks that are just listening, I'm holding up, guess what? A wallet, a regular old leather physical wallet, and there's a set of credentials in it. And proving my identity in the real world is a very simple, intuitive process that we've followed for a couple centuries now. Of we're issued credentials and we carry them with us, keep them securely in our pocket. And when we need to go someplace and prove something, we share the set of credentials we need, and they're inspected. And if they meet the requirements of the party, we call them the verifier or the relying party, whoever it is, that, and they make the decision. All right, are you going to have the access or be given the privilege that you're requesting? What we don't have is a way to do exactly that process digitally, online, anywhere you want to go with any app or any service. In fact, we have almost the exact opposite today. As I know, everyone on this listening to this knows perfectly well, you have hundreds of accounts at different sites and systems, usernames, passwords, two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication. It's different every single place you go. We struggle to keep track of it as individuals. We use password managers and key rings and every tool we can. And the sites on the other side, they struggle with it as well, because they have to maintain this whole system. They have to protect this data. It gets hacked, it gets broken into, and now, you get identity theft. It's been a long problem, a bad problem for a long time. And if we can standardize the use of digital wallets and digital credentials, we can finally get over this hurdle for internet identity. That's my quick high-level summary.
Yeah. So to contrast this with the status quo, which is what we've had, forever, at least for this 2 dozen years of the internet, is where you have a what was called an identity provider, which is the DMV, every store that gives you a loyalty card, all of these different things. That when we say we have an ID, it's you. I went through an airport. My ID is my passport. My ID is my driver's license. There was an identity provider that gave you an identity that was theirs. It was their administrative identity, but they're labeled for you. But they issued it. And then there were relying parties. So the security officer at the airport is the relying party that's relying on the credential that you present them. The difference with that, which we might call identity 1.0, is that you have as many different identities that have way more information on them than you may need, or the relying party may need. But you have nothing of your own to really manage these other than the wallet in your pocket or online, the login and password. But with SSI, there's minimum disclosure for constrained uses, to use Kim Cameron's language. And it's very constrained in the sense that if all somebody needs to know is that you're over 18, you went to this school, you have this one obligation. You were talking last night about, I got on the turnpike back here. I'm getting off here. How much money do I owe? That's all you need to know about me. I drove this car here. You don't need even to know a name. You just need to know something to rely on the institutional side. So it's basically putting as much control of credentials, verifiable credentials, in the hands of the individual as possible. So how much development is actually going on for the individual on this thing right now?
An enormous amount. There are, I would say, at least 24 projects, and the majority of them open source, developing Ssi Digital Wallets, which are the tool, the primary tool that you'll use as an individual to both accept credentials from different issuers. We don't use the term identity providers because that term really has always been part of federation architecture, where the identity provider or providers in the federation sit in the middle, and everyone connects to them, and then they refer you back out to someone, some service provider or relying party who needs to verify your identity or you need to log into. With SSI, we're back to the original model of the internet, where you are connecting peer-to-peer to whoever needs you need to have a relationship with, and then they request. It's called a presentation request. Please present me with credentials that can prove this that I need to know. And like you said, it might be just you're over 18, or you have a relationship with me and you're coming back. You're logging in, right? Or you've ordered some goods. I need a credit card or a credit card token and a shipping address, whatever it is. And you're able to answer those questions. You're right out of your digital wallet. And as you said, Doc, to do it, one of the big advantages of the technology is to be able to do it with strong privacy, with what we call selective disclosure. So you only have to share the information that you need. And when the verifier, the relying party, gets that, it's digitally signed. It's actually signed from you as the holder of the information, and then any piece of data that they need. I need to know, your driving license is valid. I need to know your employment is valid. I need to know your, bank account is valid. Those things come digitally signed by the issuer. And so it actually is giving relying parties, verifiers, much higher quality verified data and only what they need. So we're actually getting stronger security and stronger privacy at the same time.
So it's all fascinating, Drummond. I got into the idea of identity provisioning back when Mark Shuttleworth studied thought. That for me was a breakthrough, where I no longer had to become subject to some gigantic hierarchical identity system, and I could now allow people who I knew to extend their authentication of me so that others who trusted them could also trust me. And looking at what you're describing here, it seems that we still haven't got away from the need to have authenticating parties validating that the assertion that I'm making is true. This world is still a world where someone that the vendor trusts tells you that you can trust me. To the extent that there is always that authentication from an existing trusted party, why is self-sovereign identity any better than a hierarchical system, given that I have still got to have people I trust telling me that it's okay to trust you?
So it's a very good point. First, let me point out one of the misconceptions about SSI, and I probably helped that misconception with what I just said by holding up my wallet, where every credential in there, or pretty much every credential, is issued by some third party. However, if I put my business card in that wallet and I hand it to you, that's not from a third party. That's mine, right? That's self-asserted. And if I happen to have, as I often do, business cards from a few people that are my close associates, and I take those out of my wallets and I hand them to you, yeah, it's not me, but it's not a third party attesting to something. I'm sharing my relationships. So I just want to really emphasize that it's not just third parties that will be issuers. We'll have self-attested, and we will be able to present evidence of our relationships so that we really are taking a major step towards a web of trust model. And the fundamental advantage of a web of trust is it's not hierarchical. It's basically all relationship-based or network-based. And I'm happy to go much deeper into identity networks or trust networks, because that's what we're moving towards. And that's when we really, we're not in Kansas anymore, when we really are able to start using our trust networks, our personal trust networks, our business trust networks to accomplish our goals, either as individuals or as businesses or as governments. So I'll just stop there. I hope that helped answer that.
It did, yes. So, I mean, that web of trust was the thing that I was a thought notary back in more years ago than I dare or worry about. And there was that idea of a web of trust where there wasn't going to be a gatekeeper to my relationship with you, as long as someone you trusted could say that I was who I said I was. That world seemed to be a great world. So now that brings me back to looking at SSI. SSI looks to me like it has become dependent on blockchains. And I have a profound mistrust of blockchains because they have fungible coins involved in them. And no matter how good the solution proposition of the blockchain is, the fungible coin brings all the crooks in. So are blockchains fundamental to SSI, or is it still possible to do SSI in the way that Thought did it, with a web of trust and repurposing a certification network?
Absolutely the latter. In fact, what's I see on the screen right now, KERI, which stands for Key Event Receipt Infrastructure, is, I think, one of the most exciting technologies in the SSI space, because it explicitly says builds from keys and identifiers that you create in your own digital wallet, and then you share them as needed, and every one of them can be cryptographically verified by any other party. And if you want to prove basically your rotation of your own keys, you can choose as many parties you want to be what are called KERI witnesses. And each time you rotate a key, you sign that and send it to a witness. They sign it. So you have proof of your keys and your provenance of your keys with as many witnesses as you want. You choose them, not a third party. And you can use a blockchain as a witness, but you do not have to, and you are portable. So I'm actually one of the biggest proponents. I'm because SSI grew out of the cryptography and the sort of the different trust model of blockchains. It gets very closely associated with blockchains. And when I do presentations, one of the first things I do is explain quickly. SSI is not dependent on blockchains. Blockchains, if you use one, it plays a very thin role. Really, all it's doing is helping us do decentralized public key infrastructure, decentralized PKI. And there are a number of ways to do that, and blockchain is only one. And so the dependency on blockchain has gone down and down and down, right down to the point where you don't have to be involved with the blockchain at all. It is dependent. It's very dependent on digital signatures and you controlling your keys and signing statements and then encrypting things when you need to with the parties you're dealing with peer-to-peer. But the confusion that all is dependent on blockchain, the sooner we get beyond that, the better.
I'm very much in favor of that as an objective, I have to tell you. So it relies on crypto keys, and the next biggest problem has been generating, managing, and storing crypto keys, which seems to be a point of weakness in any identity system. They've got to live somewhere, and that is the place that the crooks go to try and steal things. to what extent do you think that is a weakness of the proposition of SSI? That the idea that the private secrets will need to be safely kept by the people or the entities that the identity is about, rather than by a trusted provider like a bank now?
Oh, I love that question. And Simon, you're right on top of the biggest skeptics I see about SSI are those that say people can never manage keys. It's too complex. Key management is too hard, and it's too important that if you lose your keys, you lose everything that you have access to. And folks like to point out, I've heard statistics of as much as 20% of all Bitcoin ever issued is gone because the keys have been lost by whoever had the Bitcoin. There's a wonderful episode of The Big Bang Theory that is all based on that premise. I like to point out, okay, so we think key management is so hard, and then I ask someone, well, are you using any chat applications, like secure chat? And they'll go, oh yeah, I use WhatsApp and Telegram, iMessage, I use Signal. I said, oh, how are you managing the keys? And they look at me sort of like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, you don't understand that all of that is completely encrypted, all your conversations, all the key management is going on there, and you don't have to worry about it at all? And they go, oh, I didn't know those were using keys there. Now, they're not using keys in the same way you would with a digital wallet. But my point, Simon, is if we have, companies like, Apple and Google and Twitter and Facebook and Salesforce, all these companies, and we're producing world-class software to solve some of the hardest problems in, business and computing. And we can't focus on how you empower an individual to adequately generate, backup, recover their keys. What are these incredibly, NASA rockets in our pockets with smartphones? We can't solve that problem. Of course we can solve that problem. We just haven't had the motivation or desire to solve it, because when you give an individual control over their cryptographic private keys and all the things that means they can now control and prove, you're going to change the power dynamic of the internet. And I know this is a subject, near and dear to Doc's heart, because he wrote a book about what happens when you start to change that power dynamic. But I would suggest it's not only, it is being solved by the different SSI digital wallet projects. And I want to introduce something. We have a lot of emphasis on the wallet, but in fact, it's the software that's surrounding the wallet, that's operating the wallet, so to speak. And some people are talking about an OS, called a wallet-powered OS. That's really the key to the usability and all the different, backup recovery, simplicity, all those things. We call that the agent. And I believe what's going to happen is the emphasis is going to shift from the wallet to the agent, and what these agents are doing for your personal agency, and how they can simplify and automate many interactions you have over the internet and increase your privacy and security at the same time. So I know that's a little bit longer answer than maybe you were after, but I think this myth that people will not be able to manage keys is a little bit like the myth people will never carry around a computer in their pocket. Yeah, what happened there?
Yeah, so I have a number of questions, but first I have to let people know that joining Club TWiT is another great way to support our network. As a member, you'll get access to ad-free versions of all the shows on TWiT, as well as other great benefits. There's a bonus TWiT Plus feed that includes footage and discussions that didn't make the final show edit, as well as bonus shows we've started, such as the Giz Fizz, AMAS or AMAS, I'm not sure which, and AMAs, and fireside chats with some of your favorite TWiT guests and co-hosts. Then there's the community aspect. We have a really fun Discord server that's available only for our Club TWiT members. Want to know when Jonathan Bennett's Untitled Linux show goes live? Join the Discord and catch it there. So sign up to join Club TWiT for just $7 a month. Head over to twit.tv/clubtwit and join today. We thank you for your support. So I have to look back through my notes to the question I wanted to ask coming out of this, which actually has to do with open source, and because that's our focus here. I think SSI absolutely needs an open source foundation, and it can't be something it's bolted on. I think it has to be something it rests on. You just joined a company by acquisition that wants to get into this space that wasn't in it before. How are you going to lead them? I mean, what's your job doing now? Because I know that's part of your job, and it's one of the reasons you're here. Tell us how that goes. Because it's probably an analog for many other companies trying to do the same thing or already downstream.
I suspect you're absolutely right, Doc. And the fascinating thing about Avast, Avast is, primarily established reputation globally as an antivirus, and has worked outward to other areas of cybersecurity. When it was first announced actually the first thing that happened at Avast was last June, they announced that they'd hired Charlie Walton, who was the VP Identity at MasterCard, to come join Avast and head up the new, what they're calling the Digital Trust Services unit there. And that was a surprise to many people that Avast was suddenly making a move into identity. Well, then in December, when it was announced that Avast was acquiring Evernym, it became clear that it was a move into SSI, decentralized identity specifically. And the reason is that Avast recognized that that was the whole next frontier, the whole next major growth area. If we want to lay a solid foundation for the next generation of cybersecurity, guess what it comes down to? It comes down to, everyone, individuals, businesses, governments, everyone controlling their keys in digital wallets and using them not only to establish trusted connections, solving all these identity problems we're looking at, but then have secure private communications and workflows that are not subject to, 99% of the attacks that are happening out there today. One of the classic things is if you can prove who you are to the site you're dealing with or app you're dealing with, and they can prove that to you, you basically will eliminate phishing attacks. And phishing attacks are the subject of more than 50% of all the cyber security attacks that are happening out there. That's how companies get infected. Ransomware attacks, they almost always start from a successful phishing attack. I like to tell the story as a full-time identity and cybersecurity professional for 25 years. I still can get an email that I cannot determine if it is valid, and it happened twice last year with emails from banks associated with these transitions that we're in, and I both cases I had to go and consult multiple other people to determine whether the email was valid or not. If that's my situation, imagine how bad it is for consumers like my poor wife who draws me in a couple times a week to say, what do I do with this communication? So Avast said, this is where it needs to go, and we want to move aggressively into that space. Avast has not been. They've been a freeware company. They've been leading the sort of freemium model for 2 decades now. That's how they grew their user base to 435 odd million users around the world. But they haven't been fundamentally an open source company. what they recognized moving into this is SSI. You're absolutely right, Duck. It is the fundamental. If we're going to be empowering individuals to take control of their keys, their identifiers, their credentials, and therefore have this control panel for their digital life, they're going to have to be very confident that we're fundamentally saying today our digital lives are centered on our accounts with big tech, right? It doesn't matter the company, Amazon, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever it is. We are primarily living our digital lives in the walled gardens of those big tech companies. If we're going to become more self-sovereign and get back to peer-to-peer relationships and webs of trust, then we can't be using proprietary technology that is controlled by a platform vendor. We have to be using technology that we can trust, and fundamentally, all the other things around the programming, the development advantages of it. In this case, it comes down to fundamentally a trust model, a trust issue, and open source. Many eyes make all bugs shallow. It's just it's built into the very model of open source that it, as a community, you build trust in it, and if there are problems with it, you can fix it, and you don't have to have that reliance on a single vendor.
So I'm scratching my head a little here, Drummond, because in the end, an open source community is the gardener for a commons. But when there is an instance that you have to rely on, that has to be propagated by an individual. And particularly in this area where you're going to, that the place that is going to hold the keys to your identity is going to have to be something that you trust a lot. And particularly if it's going to be something that I've got to look after myself, it's going to be in my phone or it's going to be on my computer. That's going to be a primary target for somebody who wants to attack me and steal my stuff or pretend to be me or get me into trouble. Do you think that an open source project can actually be a home for software that the common person relies on? Or do you think that ultimately it's going to have to be a security company that you trust to propagate that code, even if it is being maintained in an open source community?
Simon, I think you just hit the perfect balance of what I think is going to win out in the market and why Avast made this acquisition and is moving aggressively into SSI. I think that the base, the core, will be open source so that it has that community trust, and then it will be wrapped, packaged, and maintained by companies whose professional reputation and business model is around we're your partner, you the individual, and we're your partner, you the business, in using and protecting those tools to achieve your goals. So it's I can't say how enthusiastic I am that when you find, I think, the maximum adoption of open source, it's the complement. You find the right business model around how the open source project can be complementary to whatever the economic or social goals are. And businesses that have built major, have really built entire foundations on top of open source. That's what they're doing. They're adding value, and that it wins in several ways. Not only do they propagate the open source and build confidence in it, but then they're motivated to contribute back, right? Whether it's anything like Red Hat or IBM building on top of it, and that cycle is a virtuous cycle. What we want to do is bring that cycle to SSI, and not just digital identity, but again, digital agents. And so that there's a confidence in the core, but then you have companies like Avast building on top of it and giving consumers and businesses. Most of Avast companies are smaller businesses, but a great number of them, giving them all confidence in this new approach and paradigm for how to maintain secure and confident digital relationships. Right.
So related to that question, there's a question come up in the chat that was talking about tying keys to a cell phone number. Ultimately, when it comes to using complex crypto, there is going to have to be a balance between ease of use and unbreakable security. And I wonder how you resolve that. How do you make sure that when I lose my phone, I can still get into my bank? How do you make sure that whatever mechanism you used for that isn't one that some guy with a black hat can steal from me and get into my bank pretending I'm me?
You're asking one of the most important questions, the heart of SSI wallet technology, and it's a really good one. First, I just want to make sure it's clear that the generation of your keys and the DIDs, Decentralized Identifiers, which is basically a cryptographic, it's an identifier like the other kinds you see in your browser for web pages and URLs, things like that. A DID is one of those that's generated either from directly from a key pair or by a transaction with a blockchain or a cryptographic system, such that identifier you can prove control of because you can sign a challenge. For instance, if you have that identifier, you can message me and I can sign the return message such that you can go, oh, you control that identifier, you know it, you cryptographically proof of that identifier. Yes, there's the spec right there. I put about 6 years of my life into this spec, which has been all the way through the process at W3C to become what they call a W3C recommendation. Except I like to point out, or I hate to point out, that in the final vote, the vast majority of W3C members were in favor, but there were 3 what are called formal objections, which is when a company says, "Oh no, we don't want this. We don't think it should become a standard yet." Interesting enough, at W3C, guess who those 3 formal objections were from? No, seriously, take a guess.
I'll just say, yeah. I mean, so Facebook, Google, and Amazon.
Well, you're right on one of the 3. If I told you they were all browser vendors, what would your 3 guesses be?
So it'd be so Google, Apple, and Microsoft.
You would guess that the 3rd one would be Microsoft, but no, Microsoft. Unfortunately, Mozilla, yes.
Yeah.
So Google, Apple, and Mozilla all had their.
They are a disappointment to me. We'll have to get somebody on from them. They really are.
Actually, I think that is worthwhile. Now, I just in their defense, they all had reasons. The deepest discussions I've had with those, as you might expect, is with the Mozilla team, where I think there's some combination of not fully understanding, some aspects of the spec, but more deeply, they did have concerns. Interestingly, to Simon's point about reliance on blockchain, a number of the part of the popularity of DIDs, these cryptographically verifiable identifiers, is the spec actually says here's the overall format of the identifier and the what we call the DID document, that when you resolve one, you get back the document. It can be in different formats, JSON or CBOR, but it has the associated public key or keys and what we call the endpoint, so you can talk to the agent or whatever might be at the other end. But what we did is we said, we standardized those things, but how you produce the identifier and the DID document, that is something that we left open to say that's defined by what we call a DID method. And you can have many different DID methods because there are different ways to solve that problem of cryptographically verifying the identifier. What we didn't expect, I thought there might be, 10, 12, maybe as many as, 24. But by the time we finished the 2-year effort at W3C, we're up to 115 different DID methods had been registered with us in the registry maintained there. So it's proved to be enormously popular, all these different ways that you can produce these cryptographically verifiable identifiers, all of which have associated ways to manage the keys, by the way, which is why there's this explosion of innovation going on around that. All three of the companies, Google and Apple and Mozilla, were objecting to say, that's too many. We can't support all of that. And furthermore, some of them use blockchains, and there's a real issue of environmental sustainability with many blockchains. So these were part of their objections, and you can understand some of them. The working group said, well, look, our first step was to standardize this. Then we can go on and tackle standardizing and optimizing the best DID methods, but let's take it one step at a time. And we still strongly believe that, and it's still being discussed at W3C. We expect a final decision sometime this spring. But we thought it was very instructive that it was three browser vendors, and particularly Mozilla, that would object to something that fundamentally we believe is in the best interests of internet users. And again, it's about this power shift, and it's going to happen one way or another. I know I went way down that. I'm afraid I forgot the original question.
Yeah. Well, no, that's okay. There's and I want to be clear, I don't want to crap on Mozilla here. My problem with Mozilla actually is more in the advertising world than anything here. And it may be that they made the right decision here for good reasons. The concern that I have, and I think you just visited it, but maybe you could give us a little more resolution on it, is how does this keep us from having a hopelessly fractured marketplace where we have as many different railroad gauges as there are railroad companies or railroad builders, and then it seems to me, I'm just projecting, you have to have one of the big stepping forward and saying, we're adopting that one, screw the rest of them, and then everybody else follows. Kind of like Apple did with the basic design of the iPhone with the little, with the little apps and all of that. And then Google kind of followed it, even though they're not compatible with each other. Everybody makes one app for each, and they're covered, or they're mostly covered anyway. So I'm just wondering if that's what has to happen, or if the standards process that you're still involved with there, and I see from the link that you were there as an editor, at least, and you're an author. You appear multiple places in the W3C page for this. Are you guys going to sort all this out, or is one of the bigs going to come in and just like play Bigfoot and say this is the way it is, and then we're done, or we're done enough because there's enough of an open standard below it?
So I actually think that it's door number 3 in this particular case, and what I mean by that is, if we had to rely on one of the big tech companies coming in and saying, well, this is the way it's going to be, we've already created an impossible situation, because we're saying fundamentally this has to it has to enable the power shift we're talking about. And to be blunt about it, that's not in their best interest. I do believe that they will adopt it very much the way they adopted the internet. The internet was not in the best interests back in that time of companies like Microsoft, for instance. But the wave happened. It was so good for the market and all the customers in the market that the big tech had to go along. In this case, I think we have actually two forces that are going to come to play. One is the same thing is going to be true. This is going to be a revolution, not just in cybersecurity, but actually in the most important element, which is convenience. So convenience will lead, control will follow, and we will see a whole new layer of value unlocked for the internet when you can use it for, what the Web3 folks call the internet of value. And I believe this is very substantially going to enable the internet of value. But it can't be by reliance on big tech. So there are two other factors. One is it absolutely requires open standards. Any platform that is not going to rely on a single vendor becomes a platform by virtue of being based on open standards. So the internet itself, TCP/IP is the standard suite. The web, HTTP and URIs, and you have to have those open standards. That's what we're building with DIDs, and that's what we're building with verifiable credentials, which is also a W3C standard. And there are more to follow. What we need to do is congeal these things into a single interoperable stack, very much like the TCP/IP stack that enabled the internet, right? Without that stack, we would not have the internet. And by the way, a lot of folks don't know, TCP/IP was the rebel alliance of the networking world, right? There was another much bigger, much better funded project that had all the attention of the press and the industry, the OSI model for how we were going to start to internetwork everything. And along came this little, rebel alliance of TCP/IP, and like 3-4 years, it was all over. TCP/IP had won. It was just fundamentally a better solution, a more democratic peer-to-peer. It was just a better network architecture. What we're working on now is saying we need a stack for this new world where with DIDs and verifiable credentials and protocols designed to use them, and I'm going to mention specifically DIDCOM and KERI, they're not exactly the same thing, but we are working on fitting them together. And that stack is called Trust over IP, TOIP, and the Trust over IP is again, it's another Linux Foundation project. It was started just about 2 years ago now, and Trust over IP is where we're pulling this all together into a stack. Not only, yes, there's the site right there, not only for a technology stack, but we call it a dual stack because the other part is governance. You only get trust if people in businesses, governments agree as to how a technology is going to be used to achieve trust. And so I co-chair the governance stack working group at Trust over IP because that we're actually that made great progress there. We have what we call the Trust over IP meta model. And with that stack, we can build interoperable digital trust ecosystems at any scale, not just global networks like Facebook and Amazon, but local ones. I should be able to have a trust network for the neighborhood. I live here in North Seattle, right? For your church, for your school, and for your school district, and then for your city and your state, and every place you need a trust network, you should be able to have one, and they should all be interoperable. And that's what we're working on with Trust over IP. And now I will finish my point. That third factor that's going to drive adoption and interoperability is going to be the same thing that did it for the internet and the web, and that is the value of the network effect. As we start to produce these network effects and these start to grow, no one can stop that, right? How would you stop the internet once it started going? It was just too obvious how much value it brought, how many problems it solved.
Right. So if I could drill into the question that you were as it was at the beginning of your comment there, Drummond. It does strike me as you're describing the distributed IDs that Mozilla's got a point, that there's 1 million of them, and the vast number of different methods and origins for those distributed IDs basically means that it's going to be left to somebody to exercise market power to decide what the de facto standard is going to be. Do you think there is a need for a foundation or a coalition of players to step in and say this is the subset that everyone will support in browsers initially? Do we need a self-sovereign identity foundation to say what those digital IDs are going to be so that it doesn't become something that's owned by the largest player with the most market power?
So, Simon, I want to be clear. That is one thing the Trust OIP Foundation is working on right now. It's actively, as I said, anyone who listens to this podcast goes, well, I want to get involved with this. That's the first place I would point you, trustoverip.org. It's not the only place. There's also a Decentralized Identity Foundation, which is more working on the tech and less on the question. They do have an interoperability working group, and the two foundations collaborate a lot more and more. The reason I don't think it'll be big tech that does this. They will make their choices, and one of the things we've been in dialogue with Mozilla about is they asked, "Hey, look, 115 DID methods. Really, what's going to happen?" They literally asked us at Evernym, now at Avast, what was our opinion. And you're familiar with power laws and how these things go. A lot of folks are not aware. The web addresses, URL, well, we want to call them URLs, technically URIs in our browser, right? The little line at the top when you go to a page. That's a standard, web standard. Technically, we all call them URLs because those are the addresses of web pages. But that's one type of what's called a URI, Uniform Resource Identifier. And I'm curious, Simon, for instance, do you know how many IANA maintains a registry of URIs, all the different types? Can you guess how many are registered?
I would expect there to be hundreds and hundreds.
Yeah, roughly. It's about 370.
The reason I guess is, I was involved in allocation of well-known port numbers back God knows how many years ago. And there were an infinite number of them because every company and their dog wanted to control a port that they communicated over. And so everybody created their own way of doing something. And I'd expect, I think that's really the problem that the DIDs have got, is that instead of everyone saying, hey, a cool way of doing it is the way those people are doing it, everyone is saying, hey, my control point is going to be my custom method, and the success of my brilliant idea is going to mean we then control the market because it will be the one that everyone has to use. And I think that's really the question that I'm getting at here is I don't want that to happen. I don't want the crypto bro with the big coin to be the one who decides how self-sovereign identity works in the next decade. And I want someone to step in and prevent that from happening.
I couldn't agree with you more. So here's my point. There are roughly 370 URI methods that have been registered with IANA. How many do we actually use, right? It's not only less than 10, but of course the vast majority. I don't have the exact statistics, but I would guess it's upward of 98% of all of those URIs are URLs, right? URLs, HTTP or HTTPS has largely one, and the rest can exist, but they really, and what drove that? It wasn't actually Microsoft or Netscape or anyone else. It was the market. The market said, we need web pages to be interoperable. We need browsers to understand web servers everywhere, right? Exactly the same thing is going to happen. If you ask me right now to make a bet, and we made this point in our dialogue with Mozilla, there is one DID method that I think has properties. In fact, it was I saw the page earlier in the podcast, because it's portable and because it has some tremendous key management advantages. KERI is likely to be, if I had to make a bet right now, I would say that within a few years we will, that 98% adoption will be KERI. And KERI is actually even broader than DIDs. There's a DID method for KERI, but there's a very good chance that will be it. I think there will be a couple others, just like we have a couple other standard URL types. And I want to point out many of those other DID methods, in fact, the vast majority, Simon, you're absolutely right. They've been registered by blockchain projects because they all want to say, hey, use us. We support DIDs, come and use our blockchain for this. And just being realistic, do I think a handful of blockchains will survive to become major public utilities? Yes. What exactly they will prove out to do, I don't know. And am I concerned about the environmental sustainability? Yes, very, very deeply. As much as I want to solve internet trust, I don't want the planet, if the planet burns up or we burn ourselves up, that's not going to work either.
So we are, I was going to say we're almost out of time, but basically we are out of time. And especially that last thing you just said is like, oh, wait a second. We could drill down into that one too. We usually finish up with some 4 questions, but we don't have time for the one where you tell us what we haven't asked yet. And the one about blockchain, because we just covered that one. So I'll go into a couple that you probably won't answer or can't answer just because, like me, you're not a developer, but you're involved in standards. But those are, what's your favorite text editor and scripting language?
Oh, interesting. Well, again, I am not a developer. I go down to the protocol level. But I will say a fascinating point on that is I am a writer. I mean, I really, I do a lot of writing, and I have actually moved over to my favorite editor now. Don't crucify me for saying this, is Google Docs. I used to be a deep Word guy and FrameMaker and these really powerful platforms. And now if I have to flip something out, I'll do it in a Google Doc. Markdown, I've become a huge fan of, and I'm going to start using it more and more. I do use it for more structured documents, but I'm not. Again, I don't use. When I do use a full, programming editor, it's PyCharm.
Okay, well, this has been great, Drummond. It has been awesome having you on the show. We will have to have you back. We said that to almost everybody. But I think given how fast things are moving here, since you've given the most in-depth, I think, and comprehensive view of this space that I've heard so far, that's I think it's important, and I hope that some of the problems that we've seen with it, which I think both you and especially Simon have pulled out, and at back channel too, where this thing can go wrong. There are lots of ways it can. My biggest concern is all the bigs, getting into it and not knowing what it's really about. They think it's about them, and it's not. It's about the rest of us out here.
Especially, this is the future of the internet we're talking about here, and it is bloody important that we get it right. We've made enough mistakes. I might make a suggestion, Doc. I've talked a lot about KERI and also about DIDCOM, these things. Sam Smith, the father of KERI, and then Daniel Hardman is one of the primary architects of DIDCOM. They're both deep developers, deep into open source. They would be fantastic guests to keep exploring this further.
Well, Daniel is definitely on my list. So thanks so much. We welcome you back soon, I hope.
Been my pleasure. I love, this topic I could talk for a very long time about.
I know you can. I know this for sure.
Thank you both. Simon, it's great to meet you.
It's good to meet you, Drummond.
So Simon, that was a lot.
Yeah. This is an area where something is going to happen, and I just hope the thing that happens, that there's really 2 parties. I don't want to get control over my ability to assert my identity digitally. One of them is I don't want it to be any of the big corporations who will then triangulate me to death. And the second thing is I don't want it to be some crypto bro who turns out to be a front for a neo-fascist organization in another country. And those 2 fears have always laid behind all of this. Every time I've seen SSI, it's coming from that great place, which was peer-to-peer web of trust. And it was at risk of heading towards that crypto bro, big money, big whale thing. And it's also because it's in W3C now in the world of big corporate politics with big corporate players. And I think that when I hear the discussion about it, I'm sitting there thinking, this is a great idea. I really want it to work. And I'm really worried that somebody that I don't want to control it is going to end up controlling it. And I think that was what was really behind a lot of my questions to Drummond today. Yeah.
There's that thing that Drummond dropped right at the end about, all of the blockchain people wanting to run this thing. It reminded me of Walt Whitman saying he thought that he thought humans were demented with the mania of owning things, and that mania is the worst thing in the human condition. I think is the and but it's very deep. Try telling a 3-year-old that that's not mine. It's mine. It's mine.
Yeah.
We have an opposable thumb. And we can grab things and hold them. And that's one of the earliest things we learn is it's mine and not my sister's, I'm not going to let you have it.
And let's face it, my cat is so jealous of my opposable thumbs. They're powerful things.
I know. So I'm going to let everybody know that next week is Lorenzo Miniero of Janus Web RTC. That's coming up. Jonathan is going to be the co-host on that. He was in our back channel today and very helpful. So what do you want to plug there, Simon, before we get off?
I'm very low on plugs these days. I'm pretty wireless. I very much value the sponsorship that I get through Patreon, and I enjoy engaging with people on Twitter as long as they don't turn out to be trolls. I look forward to seeing the whole audience there. Apart from that, very little to plug. I'm still hardly getting out of the house because of some disease that happened. What about you, Doc? What do you want to plug?
Yeah, I normally don't do plugs because I'm the host, but I do want to plug where you get to see Drummond for sure in all his capacity, if not his glory, which is at the Internet Identity Workshop. Look it up, or it's at iiworkshop.org. That's the short link, which I bought to make it as shorter. It happens the week of April 25th, 24th, 25th at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, unless COVID gets really bad, in which case we'll move it offline again or online from there. But the Internet Identity Workshop, SSI came out of there. OAuth earlier came out of there. OAuth was very well intended. Now it turned into, log in with Facebook and log in with Google. Not everything goes the way we planned in the way that Simon just said. So
exactly.
It is, the greatest plants of men, mice and men, and all of that. But it is a largely, highly anyway, open sourcey kind of thing. It's a very, very leveraged unconference. It's there are no panels, it's all workshop. It's all people working on stuff that works. So anyway, again, coming up next week, Lorenzo Miniero, and I'm Doc Searls, and we'll see you next time.
Did you spend a lot of money on your brand new smartphone and then you look at the pictures on Facebook and Instagram and you're like, what in the world happened to that photo? Yes, you have. I know. It happens to all of us. Well, you need to check out my show, Hands On Photography, where I'm going to walk you through simple tips and tricks that are going to help make you get the most out of your smartphone camera or your DSLR or mirrorless, whatever you have. And those shots are going to look so much better. I promise you. So make sure you're tuning in to twit.tv/hop for Hands On Photography to find out more.